Okay, so we've three more panelists to discuss about learning from foreign models. So our focus today is about the US system. So this is your chance to talk to some people who know a lot about university models elsewhere and maybe learn from them, like reflect on from what they say about what happens here in the US. I think I'm going to start with Haiyan and ask about the huge expansion in universities in recent years in China. So this has been a very top-down model, hasn't it? It's been the same as basically everything in China. The government says we need 1 million of such and such and makes it happen. Has this really had the sort of outcome that we might have desired?
Well, I think that yes is both yes and no. What China is good at doing is speed and scale. And if you look at from 1977, when Deng Xiaoping started to reopen the colleges, reopen the national exams, from then to now, literally 100 million, literally the 12th largest country. That many undergraduate students have gone through the universities, of course, including some of the short cycle graduates, and some 7 million postgraduate students have been trained. In terms of that quantitative massive growth, it is very impressive. And I would say that without the massive growth in education, there would not be China today. China would still be a submerged third world country. And what is really fascinating, amazing, is that Deng Xiaoping actually started the college re-education, a college reopening before he started the economic reform. But when you look at the massive growth in quantities, between 1998 and 2010, the number of college graduates grew 7 times, but the economy grew only 3.5 times, meaning that the supplies of talents is twice that much of the demand. And on the one hand, it really kept the talent pool cost competitive.
Right.
And I think that not only in the higher literacy, putting the skilled laborers into the assembly lines, but you have this massive supply, and that kept the cost low. But it does come at the price of qualities, because you can stir fry out undergraduates, but you cannot fast cook professors, because 1983, do you know how many PhDs that China graduated? A total of 18 PhDs in 1983. And I was taught by a classmate, another classmate, old high school classmate, who just graduated from university, and he became my professor back then. But of course, since 2008, China has graduated more PhDs. So going forward, in terms of enhancing China's education's qualities, innovative capabilities, independent thinking, risk-taking, I think that China is only at the beginning stage. So far, China has been very good at following the world-class universities. To become a pioneer, it's still going to be, I think, 2 decades away.
So Jamil, you've written about creating world-class research universities. I mean, is that something that just inevitably takes decades? Is this just going to have to be that way, or is this something that you can, there's a recipe for, and basically the recipe is copy the best-known universities in America? I don't know.
Well, if we look at history, the great universities of this world, like Oxford, Cambridge, and even Harvard, have several centuries old. Yeah. So we could assume that maybe it takes a long time. But in fact, in the past, we've seen tremendous efforts in the past 20 years. And some universities, especially in East Asia, have done greatly. University of Hong Kong, University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong, or Post-Tech in Korea. 2 examples, but I think the best example really is perhaps KAUST, that has emerged that was created 6-7 years ago, and already is making big positive splashes in terms of scientific development.
But I mean, this took do you want to tell us a bit about it, or and say, is this something that could be replicated, or do this basically rely on really a great deal of money?
I believe it can be replicated.
Yeah.
In fact, as was example in a different way, it's not the only one. I think in the age we are in, it's possible to move from infancy to maturity faster than 400 years ago, and maybe even to leapfrog in part because of technology. But this being said, I think resources matter. Okay, to attract people, to attract talent, you need to provide them an environment where they can succeed, and to give them the time and the opportunities to do great things. So that those things do matter. Yeah. But I think with a time where in Asia and other places, I think you're going to see programs emerging, and emerging likely more rapidly than you would have expected maybe 50 years ago, or especially 100 years ago.
I'm sort of struck by the fact that although we have got this enormous increase in scale in China, and then in many other countries also increases in scale and new institutions and so on, I mean, basically they're trying to do what universities have always done. I mean, one would hope that we really would leapfrog and maybe see something completely different, maybe a mixture of online or people working, universities being something that work really with people during their life cycle, their career cycle or so on. I mean, are we sort of stuck in a model of, copying what Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard did, but doing it much faster, or trying to do it much faster?
I think it's very dangerous if we're just trying to copy or imitate. And here the rankings can be a problem, because if we look at the number one is Harvard, and then everybody wants to be Harvard. The Harvard is unique. And I think what is important is how do you attract talent and introduce a culture of academic excellence at the same time by defining something that is unique to you. In fact, if you look at the great universities in this country, Harvard and MIT, for example, they're next door to each other, but they are very different in terms of culture, or Stanford or Caltech. So I think the challenge is to create your niche, to create what makes you unique, and to build excellence on that basis.
If I may add to this, and I will give an example specific to the place where I am at now. What we are importing, that is being exported from the West, is what I call the things which are being done very well by places like Imperial College, MIT, Caltech, where they find a way to mix, to blend curiosity-driven research and more goal-oriented research. Those great institutions do it very well. Yes. It is something that we are importing in a sense, but we are doing it in a way, having a clean slate, which is much more proactive. For instance, we place all of our faculty not in schools, colleges, departments, but into very broad units. And we have an eclectic group of people under those units. We also provide them incentives to work on themes like water, environment, energy, food, which are important locally into the globe. So we were able to accelerate the process. So we are importing something, but doing it in a different way. And I think there is a possibility of learning from the established program, from some of those things happening in different other environments, including China.
I recently read a news which caught fire in China's social media. That is that Tsinghua University somehow in the engineering field ranked by U.S. News as #1 above MIT, and then everybody was circulating that news. But what made Tsinghua University to jump on the top was really the total number of publications. But if you look at the citation impact, it is hundreds rankings below MIT. So what the government can do in China is, once the leaders say, this 9 university, we want to build it into the world-class universities, and they just put on the money on it. They hired 1,000 talents, 100 top talents, just put money behind it, and now let's push them through. So no wonder today in US News, and out of the top 10 engineering universities globally, 3 of those are Chinese universities. But I want to go back to what Dr. Shamu said about leap forwarding. I think that leap forwarding really has to tie it up to the social values, to the whole social, political, economic environment. Last night I had a conversation with my brother-in-law, who is a very senior provincial educational bureau chief. So I said, talk to me about building a world-class university. What might be the barriers? And then, he didn't answer my question directly, but he said something very interesting. He said, you know what? We are. And I said, what about depoliticization of university? He said, well, we are responsible not just for learning, but we are also responsible for building the ideology, for shaping up the ideology of the students. Now, whose ideology? So I figured it's going to be a long way before the party secretary would be, losing the power. And as long as you have universities getting the money, 90% of that money from the central government, from the state government, and money is power. So it is very hard to achieve that full independence, that creative thinking, that courage to challenge authorities, as long as you have that control. And ultimately, innovation is to walk the path nobody has walked before. And I think that is something that is very difficult to change.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major strengths of the US system has always been, almost its chaos. It's so varied that, what doesn't work goes and what does work gets copied. And so, I mean, I think, a very top-down, very high-speed, like carpet the country with universities approach is going to be much more uniform and therefore more likely to fail. Because if you make the wrong bet about how you're going to do it, you've made that bet right across the country.
It has worked, it's a miracle.
Sure.
And I think for a developing country, and if you look at India, and I think that some of what India could do is take a page from China.
Right.
And you have such a high failures of primary education in India. Nearly only 43% graduate from high schools, and the enrollment rate, not the enrollment rate, graduation rate could still be enhanced. But I think that for a lot of developing countries, China's success is to put the high amount of public expenditure on education. I think developing countries should do what China has done, but the next stage is a different story.
If I may add to the question and the answer, when I was president of Caltech until a few years ago, I was often asked, why is Caltech so successful? Okay. And my first part of my answer was always because it is in California and it benefits from an entire system. California is good, I know, but
Saudi Arabia is sunnier.
So it benefits from an entire system of higher education, public higher education, and not only the UC system, all of the California state school, vocational colleges, and other. It's part of a system, and the system allows a tiny place to do a number of things that others cannot do and should not do. So the entire system is always part of the solution, and you cannot. And the diversity of the US environment makes maybe its strengths, and we should not try to have everybody do all the same, be it education or research.
I'm sure that's correct. I mean, it's a monoculture. I mean, the lesson of monocultures is they're rather vulnerable. I wanted to ask each of you if you had to. If you're talking to an audience of people who are very much thinking about the US education system, their own American institutions. Looking from outside, I mean, I know you've all been inside as well. What would the one lesson you would say these American educators and people working in education should learn from, I don't know wherever you like? Is there one lesson you'd like to pick out and put before them?
I think that U.S. the K-12 education should be a lot more STEM focused. I think that while we congratulate the higher education success, the basic education is really, there's quite a bit of failure. And look at Montgomery County, for example, one of the largest county in Maryland, and one of the very highly educated area outside of Washington, D.C. It is just amazing that some 74% of high school students failed Algebra 1, and of all of the 4 math classes, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, over half failed in the final exams. And guess what? The solution was some blamed the grading was wrong, some blamed that the test was wrong, and finally last year they made a smart solution that, let's allocate less importance to the final exams. And this year they got even smarter. They said, let's do away with final exams. And I think that this very hard looking at why that the system failed. Maybe it's not so much all the systems problems that the parents should really focus a lot more and get the kids to work harder, longer. And I think the success of the Eastern Asian schools simply because they put in a lot more, double that number of hours into studies. And I think that has to be brought to the
But do you
level.
see this as a responsibility of people who are in the university system to make that case?
I think that yes, because I don't know in terms of the raising the bar.
Right.
Raising the bar higher for admission. If you are not college ready, you do not enter college.
I'm going to ask all my other 2 panelists the same question, like for one lesson, and then I'm going to open it up to you. And I'd be interested in hearing your response to all 3 of the lessons. Jamil,
well, picking up on this example, yes, it's the low level of high school graduates on average, if we look at the PISA test results, is a concern. See, it's not a big deal for the Ivy League universities because they are so selective. They will always be able to get the best of the best, not only from American high school but also from other countries. But on average, it is a problem, and there is a need to strengthen high school education. And one of the lessons from successful countries, whether we look in Asia at South Korea or in Europe at Finland, for example, is that their high school teachers are really seen as very important professionals in society. So they try to select the best of the best. And becoming a teacher is not a second or a default option or second-rate option, but it's really seen as something very important. But if I may look at another important lesson that worries me when I look at the American higher education system today, and perhaps it's less a lesson for educators and more for the politicians, is the financing. Because we have, it's a big worry when you see that so-called public universities receive less than 10% of their revenue from the states. You see that in Virginia, in Oregon, in Colorado. And I think one of the big challenges, the irony, is that you don't have a federal ministry of higher education. So it's happening in each state. And if you look at statistics since the financial crisis, in 48 out of 50 states, public funding has been going down. And I always remember this joke from Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises, which goes like this. How did you get bankrupt? Bill asks. 2 ways, Mike said. Gradually and then abruptly. And I think that's the challenge. And, you know, Jean-Loup mentioned California, and California has a very special history of having this master plan where looking at higher education as a whole, but very few states do that. And if nobody does it at the federal level, that's a big concern.
And what one lesson would you like to offer to our American educators, which you were, of course, very recently?
Yeah, and again, you know, my expertise has been with science and technology, elite institutions, so it doesn't really necessarily entirely apply to your question because we always find a few students that we need for those places. But I find that, and I spend quite a bit of time, obviously, in Western Europe as well as Asia. I find, as was said by my colleagues here, the public support which still exists there for the position of teachers, the public support that still exists in many ways financially to say it's important to support our primary schools and high school. I think it exists more than it currently exists in this country. I came here in 1976, and I believe over that time frame, almost 40 years, I have seen a change, a significant change here in the way we look at education, and we are willing to support education, including in California. It is not what it used to be, and it is not a change that I believe, anyway, people may have different opinions, that is for the better.
It's interesting. So, I mean, I asked, you know, what lessons would you give to some higher education, you know, thinkers, leaders here in the US? And I mean, not one of you said do anything different in universities.
One of the things
you said, you just to recap, you said, you know, make sure that schools prepare their students better for you. You know, give more public money to universities and respect teachers more. It's not that any of those are wrong. It's just interesting that none of them are actually, you know, lessons for these people sitting in front of you, the things that they can do tomorrow. So, I mean...
One of the things that when you were mentioning that, I thought about, and I don't know how effective it is, but what the government was doing is, in order to create innovation, enhance innovation capabilities, the government actually say, you know, universities, you try to do better in collaborative innovation. So this university, that university, that's set up a life science excellence center, that's set up a, you know, nanotechnology centers. So it is somewhat of a top-down approach, but very rapidly, some 20, 30, these sort of a university collaborative innovation centers, excellence centers were built up. So the government can say, you know, Academy of Science, Academy of Social Science, you must work with Beida University, Tsinghua University. So it kind of a speed and efficiency gets enhanced that way.
Let me give you two, and to maybe both of them may be a bit provocative, especially compared to the previous panel. And the one, I'm a lowly engineer, I like to use data, but I don't have data to support it, so obviously. But of the students I have recruited over many years from different parts of the world, I find those currently, I'm talking finishing high school, from Western Europe and Asia, especially Asia, to be better prepared in what you would call those harder skills. Okay, and at the same time to have what was called earlier the softer skill, which are not very different from that of the US kids. So I find that those countries are placing more emphasis on algebra and mathematics and physics and all those things, and I think we should do more of that. Again, I'm not the expert at that, and I don't have any data to support what I just said, just observation. University lesson, one I'm seeing in real time, and I hope to start speaking about it in a few years. The university I'm at, we created it without having tenure for faculty. We provide 5-year rolling contracts. And I can tell you, and I have experience, I was running major universities in this country. I think it's something that we should be looking at in terms of...
Okay, I'm going to open this up to the floor, so I'll go here. Just wait for your microphone. No, just wait for the microphone, because people won't hear you otherwise.
From a university in São Paulo, Brazil, so I can speak Portuguese. It's just a matter of order. You're only taking verbal questions.
Okay.
And we were given a nice APP where we can send our questions. I've sent a couple, and I think they're being sort of ignored. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Have I got an organizer here? I should have said that, of course. We are being sent questions. I'm not actually receiving them. I don't know how I meant to. So there's a systems failure there that will be resolved over the break. Thank you. Does anyone want to give me a question that I'm actually able to hear? I'll take someone who hasn't given a question before. I think here, and the lady right beside you, and then pass the microphone over here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think there's an elephant in the room in terms of there's no linkage between what the accountability is for the employees at the universities. And the traditional ways, I should share my background. I was a chief human resources officer at Long Island University for 9 years, and now I'm in consulting. And the 800-pound gorilla is, where's the linkage between the traditional ways that we've rewarded employees and the change that we're trying to facilitate in terms of the global student population that we're now trying to attract, and the SEP plans that we're spending so much time on? Where's the linkage between the employee skills at these institutions and what we're trying to achieve for our students? Okay. I think the skills are missing in our employee populations, but our traditional reward strategies don't address that, because we pay for longevity and we pay for technical expertise, but we don't attach accountability to that.
I'm going to ask my panelists after I've taken one more, if they can respond with a view from abroad on this one, maybe.
If you could pass it. I'll try to get you to.
Hi, Kayla Johnson from the American Journal of Education. My question is in response to something that Ms. Wong said. One of her solutions was to bring more interaction from the parents. She said that getting parents more involved in the education of their children could be a possible solution to this gap. And my question is sort of revolved around something that I think has been missing from the conversation so far, which is diversity. And so how does diversity, racial, ethnic, economic, play into your solution? And what are the complexities behind that?
I'll just pass the microphone to this lady here, and I'll take her question or point, and then we'll return to the panelists.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think there's a political aspect missing from this. So, for example, China is, it's not a democracy, but it's a very strong state. So they can say, put a university here.
Yeah.
India is a democracy and a very weak state. So they don't have that power. So I'd be interested in unpacking that a little bit more.
Sure, sure. Okay, I'm going to come back to my panelists. So we heard about tenure. We heard about accountability of your staff for providing what it is we're saying we all want to do, and that there's some sort of non-linkage there. Diversity, how that interacts with any solution, in fact, not just the solution that, maybe get parents more involved. And also, well, how do you make things happen in different sorts of countries? Would you each like to sort of, reflect on some or all of those from your international perspective? Jamil, I'll start with you.
Starting with the last one about politics, I think when you observe China and India, there is a paradox, is that even though China is much less of a democracy than India, within some limits, the universities have a much more flexible management arrangements and structure. I think what is killing Indian institutions of higher education is the bureaucracy. So yes, in theory, the state is you have much more democracy. But in practice, it's so rigidly controlled, and I think that explains why Indian higher education is so much behind. On the issue of accountability, I think it's true that there are limits in the US, but I think relatively you are still doing much better than other parts of the world. I think I liked the presentation this morning, the breakfast panel from our colleagues from the Arizona State University. I think one of the big differences that I see in US higher education compared to many other countries is that it has moved a lot towards being student-centered. Rather than being the big challenge in many other countries is that the university seems to be made for the comfort of the teachers, of the professors. And there is very little accountability in terms, I mean, you have student engagement surveys, you have rankings, you have many accountability measures that may not be perfect, but at least gives a much better focus on the needs of the students rather than the needs of the professors.
Interesting. So your lesson from abroad is that, it's not so bad here. Count your blessings. Would one of you two like to pick up on a point?
Well, maybe the point I like very much to pick up on is the diversity one. And by the way, I'm learning a lot in my new job. Diversity was very important in my previous job at Georgia Tech and Caltech. But the university I'm at is based on being diverse and international. We have people from 90 different countries, not only among the students, but among the staff and faculty. And also one piece of statistic, if I look at, it's only master and PhD student, graduate student in engineering and science. 36% of them are women. Those of you who know those programs here, not at the graduate level in the US, it is not 36%, it is not 36% in France or Western Europe either. So it is a strong focus, and we believe it's going to do something good. Okay. However, it is hard. I can tell you that it is not something easy to put into action. I always give a facetious example, which is a real one having to do with research. When I bring a faculty from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and I want him or her to work with a dude from Stanford, they are very smart, both of them. They look at things differently in terms of organizing teams, how to relate to people. And when you put them together, making diversity work is not easy. But it is clearly, and it should be a high priority in all the institutions that we are at.
In terms of bringing the globalization and global aspects to the higher education, the student body is already fairly getting more and more global. But in terms of the faculties, I don't know too much about the reward system in universities, but I think that in terms of globalizing the teaching part, it will happen organically, because you do have more and more professors who are ethnic, Asians or Europeans that graduate from PhD programs and become professors. What the Asian universities have been doing extremely well is to get a lot of foreign scholars to come in, whether it's one year or whether to hire aggressively PhDs from the top universities. We don't see US universities hiring from foreign universities the best of the PhDs, and I think that maybe that could be done.
Do you not think that that's because they get them in as PhD students so much more?
Well, actually, I think that it's just a matter of awareness, a matter of desire to go look outside of the PhD programs here and to see whether we can bring in any of the best scholars. And then you look at Tsinghua and Beida, when they try to hire professors, they look beyond China. They look at MIT's, Harvard, and everywhere to see where the best talents are, and we give them the equivalent salaries and bring them in. And then every year, scholars come to the U.S. university to study, but the vice versa flow, I think, is not happening as much. Parents, I think that there is a political correctness to not want to discuss the difference in performance from the different racial background, and the fact that overall Asian families put a lot more focus on education, and I think that somehow that discussions is not happening. And I have met so many Indian parents or Chinese parents. They think that if kids get 95 or below, it's a B. And it's not acceptable. 95 or below is a B, and so that kind of if you don't work 10 hours, it's not good enough. So I think that that conversation is not happening enough to learn across the different diverse ethnic background. What's the great about this background versus that? And politically, oh yes, let me stop here. Yeah, let me, Dr. Mitchell.
If I may reinforce the point about the hiring of faculty on an international basis and maybe a learning position here. And I think I can speak to it because I was president of Caltech and I was recruiting worldwide. However, the outcome was, let's be honest, US-centric with a bit of a European flavor. Okay? And now I'm recruiting worldwide, and I can tell you I'm learning, and I have discovered amazing opportunities in a number of different countries that were not really on the radar screen of myself and Caltech before.
Okay, tell them, where should they be getting?
Korea.
Right.
Yeah.
South Africa, China, Singapore. Okay, Morocco. I have found some interesting. So you have to. I think there may be a learning there. If it's my last university job, believe me. But if I had another presidency in me, I would take a different approach if I came than I had a number of years.
So the major outcome of this panel is going to be that I've told a bunch of American universities how to poach even more from the rest of the world.
I think you live in a global world now. Either we say it and we mean it, or we say it okay. It is a global world. Top talent is looking for places where they can have impact, places where they are given the chance to succeed and the time to succeed. And I think you have to realize that irrespective of where you are, being China, the US or France. I think it is
what you hear in other universities in other countries is, we can't compete because American universities take the best people and pay them the most. So it's very interesting to hear you say.
But if I may add a nuance, because there is something very important that is happening at KAUST, and that may explain why top researchers from the US or from Europe, from anywhere, would be interested, is that increasingly in Europe and in the US, and correct me if I'm wrong, researchers have to spend so much money looking for money, applying for grants. And if I remember correctly from my first visit to KAUST, there, top researchers are recruited and being given grant money, and they have to show results for it, but the process is
they can
less
actually
cumbersome.
do their job.
Take the example of Switzerland. Look at the great successes of EPFL and ETH Zurich over the past 25 years. They don't get their funding from an endowment like we are. We are a private university, but you have a strong state support for research and education, and a faculty member at those universities can have a long-term view. And a great example is a place like EPFL, which has made some dramatic improvement over the past 15, 20 years. So it is not only in emerging countries, it also Switzerland is an established Western country.
I've often thought, covering not just education, but pretty much anything, that often the solution to whatever problem you're discussing is, swap politicians or swap leaders or swap systems. So you obviously have a lot of strengths here in the US. There's a reason most of the top-ranked universities are still here, and on a global level, you do have a lot of students who do very well. But it sounds like you could maybe do a bit more central planning, a bit more organisation, things like a federal Ministry of Education, long-term commitments to spending plans and so on. And probably China could do with a bit less of that, swap and take the system here. Another round of questions, very brief. I'll just take a couple here. We actually have a question now instead of telling me how I'm getting things wrong.
Now I have a proper question.
Yeah.
It seems to me that so far there has been a very big stress on competition. Now, is this the best we can do in education?
Okay. Does anyone else want to ask one very brief question, and I'll go back to the panel on both of them. So here.
If they could just reflect on the concept of U.S. institutions taking degrees abroad. Okay. We haven't talked about it that way.
So two very big questions that were both stated with admirable conciseness. So competition and going abroad. Would each of you like to?
Let me take competition. And again, I will speak only from what I know, which is at the research level. We talk about competition, but there is much more there is as much collaboration as competition. If you look at most of the great universities, that is the ones involved in research at a high level, they collaborate together in an enormous way. In fact, and we are a good example because we have collaboration with about 20 or 25 different other universities. When I was at Caltech, there is a Caltech MIT fight. you don't know how the number of research projects are done jointly between those two universities. So it's a bit of a game. Huh? You talk a lot about it, but in fact you work together because you have to. You cannot nowadays have enough resources to do everything.
Right.
So you have to collaborate.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to echo that. And I think the fact that we need in a global world means competition, whether we like it or not. But the beauty of education is that we have a tradition of collaboration. And the internet can enhance that. Just to give you a personal example, my brother-in-law is a professor of robotics at university in Canada. And he has a very expensive piece of equipment. It's a small robot, like the robot that went on planet Mars, costs $30 million. And many universities in developing countries cannot afford that. But he has PhD students from Mexican universities who can, through the internet, program the research. They don't have to buy this expensive piece of equipment, but they can benefit from it. And if I can, on the campuses, sending, I think it's a good thing if you do it for a good reason. So if you do it just to earn money, if you do it just to not impose, but spread your program, I'm not sure that's the best way of doing it. If you go because you want also to learn, and it's part of the collaboration, then I think that having a US campus in Malaysia can be a good thing, but you could also have, and that's perhaps we don't have enough of that, an Australian campus in the US, or why not a Chinese campus in the US?
I think that from a system standpoint, China could use more competition. China could use more private universities, could allow foreign universities to set up campuses into China to challenge the state-owned universities. The collaboration happens by the professors. Professors go to all international academies conferences. They want to write papers. They want to do research on their own. I think that happens organically. You mentioned about U.S. institutions setting up abroad. There are a lot of non-degree programs that Western universities set up in China. One of the first fully independent legal identity that was set up in 2012 in Shanghai is the Shanghai New York University. But 2013, only 300 students were recruited. So it is very much at the early stage of setting up that joint universities. But still, even in Shanghai New York University, there got to be a party secretary sitting on the top.
I presume part of the point for institutions, like should be if they're doing it properly, that the flow goes both ways. I presume it's meant to be a selling point back in the US that, this is a globalized market, you're going to get a chance to go abroad for part of your studies and so on. Okay, I've just hit the point at which this thing is saying 000 at me. I have some notes here that include saying this is your first networking break. Please remember to submit your questions by app. For me, the note is find out how I can read those questions. So I'll see you back here in 30 minutes. Thank you all very much, and thank you to our panelists.